The U.S. Civil War, the Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862. General George McClellan's Army of the North and General Lee's Confederate Army battle for a full day in the fields to the east of Sharpsburg, Maryland. Several times during the course of the day, the Confederate lines are on the verge of breaking, but each time they manage to hold. The battle would become the bloodiest day in United States history, with over 23,000 wounded or killed. History deems the day a victory for the North, as the Confederate Army abandoned their attempted northern invasion. However, history also asks a question of the day. If the ever-cautious and conservative General McClellan had been bolder and more daring, could the North have inflicted a catastrophic defeat on General Lee's army and altered the trajectory of the Civil War? Hi everyone, I'm Zilla Blitz. Welcome. To explore the hypothetical question of General McClellan's boldness at the Battle of Antietam, we're going to be using the tabletop wargame Antietam from Command Post Games. We're going to play out the entire battle, and at every decision point for the North, we're going to decide aggressively to push the attack on the Confederate forces. Could a bold General McClellan have inflicted a much greater defeat on General Lee's Army of the Potomac, thereby shortening the length of the Civil War? Or would aggression have led to recklessness, thereby tipping the battle in the favor of the South and allowing General Lee to continue his invasion plans of Pennsylvania? Let's step back into history to 7 a.m. on September 17th, 1862. We're looking at the geographical features. The town of Sharpsburg is here, and this winding waterway is Antietam Creek, which will play a role in the battle as we go forward. Union forces are in blue, Confederate forces are in gray, and a defensive perimeter around Sharpsburg. Some other big picture elements to this simulation. Each turn is 1.5 hours. It starts at 7 a.m. We're going to play 8 turns in this day, taking us all the way up to 7 p.m. Each one of these blocks can be either infantry, cavalry, or artillery, and each one of the infantry blocks, as we're looking at it, represents about 4,000 to 6,000 men. In terms of scale, 3 3/4 of an inch is 1 mile. So if we put down this ruler, here is 3 3/4 of an inch from the start. So we can see that up to the north. North is to our right, by the way. We can see that the Union Confederate forces are less than a mile apart up there, about a mile apart in the middle, and closer here, although separated by Antietam Creek down here further to the south. A bit of historical backdrop to this battle. Lee's Army of the Potomac had invaded the North. They were hoping to drive on towards Pennsylvania. But Washington, D.C., by the way, is about 50 miles to the southeast of their forces as they stand right now. Lee had divided his force up into 4 different components, and the North actually got a copy of those orders, so McClellan mobilized his army, hoping to catch Lee's army piecemeal and defeat them in the course of 4 separate engagements. However, Lee was able to reassemble all his forces except for A.P. Hill, who will show up in the afternoon of the 17th here. And both forces then assembled outside of Sharpsburg on the 17th of September, 1862. Looking at this battle too, I would like to add too that this is a semi-historical setup. I've tried to adhere to the general idea of the setup for both of these troops, but I have moved some into what I think are good defensive positions. But for the most part, the Union and Southern forces are assembled as they were that morning. However, I did have to move some of the Confederate forces around to kind of get better command and control organization within the game rules. But for the most part, this is what it looked like on the morning of September 17th, 1862. Let's talk about the different types of units that are going to be at the battle today. On the left, we have 4 different levels of infantry that are going to be engaged in the battle. We'll come back and talk about those individually momentarily. On the right, we have a cavalry unit. They're designated with the C and this kind of diagonal color here. So this is the Union 2nd Cavalry here. They move faster, of course, because they're mounted and they have some greater range capabilities. Artillery is AR, representing cannon at the battle. This unit here is actually baggage trains. This represents the supply and kind of food and water and ammunition that's going to be present at the battle. These play a critical role in the battle, and we'll talk about those when we look back at the map. Lastly, we have leaders. These are important for command and control, but the individual leaders themselves can't be targeted and killed in the battle. They just basically shuffle around as the case may be. Now let's talk about our 4 infantry types. If it's got this kind of splash mark here, this is an elite unit. They can withstand more damage and fight better than regular infantry. Regular infantry don't have any markings on them at all. G stands for green. They don't take as much damage and don't fight as well as regular or elite troops. And lastly, the weakest troops of all are detachments. They tend to not last very long at all in battle. As I mentioned in the introduction, one of the elements of this, one of the historical elements of this battle was that McClellan at times perhaps hesitated, times there was fog of war, or just by kind of a positioning of his troops that wasn't ideal, wasn't able to press some advantages where they had the Confederate troop lines on the ropes. And at the end of the day, one of the big questions was, could McClellan have done a lot better if he had been more aggressive? McClellan was notorious for over-exaggerating the strength of his enemy forces, and 2 months after this battle, President Lincoln relieved him of duty. So our examination today is to do exactly the opposite. We are going to make McClellan aggressive, pushing forward with the North to try to use their superior numbers to break the South and to achieve a more epic victory, a more historic victory than they were able to get in historic times. Let's talk about victory conditions in the battle. One of the ways you can win is by wiping out 50% of your opponent's infantry units, not counting detachments. The North has 16 such units, so if the South wipes out 8 of them, they win. The South have 10 core infantry units. Again, we can even just look at the number of blocks here. The South is outnumbered. They're on the defensive in this battle. In that case, if the Union can knock out 5, they win. So that's one way to gain victory. A second way to gain victory is by reaching your opponent's baggage trains. Now, these baggage trains, here are the 2 for the South. Here are the 3, 1 up here to the north, and then 2 on the west edge. This is just on the edge of the screen here, 3 here. These represent supply, food, ammunition, and they play an important role because they can refresh troops that get spent during the course of the battle. But if your opponent reaches them, it's game over, representing kind of complete disintegration of your command and control, and you have lost the battle. So that is a second way that you can win the game. Now the North has a third way they can win. The tactical situation for the South here is that they don't want to get cut off from a larger supply situation, which is represented by these ways to cross the Potomac down here, position 1, position 2. If the North can get around here to a position where they cut off the South's supply chain, then they win the battle as well. There is, however, one third supply option for the South, which is up here. If they could break the northern lines here, which is unlikely, and open up this supply source up on the north part of the battlefield, that would constitute a supplied Southern army as well. So those are the 3 ways: this larger supply picture, reaching your opponent's baggage chains, or inflicting 50% casualties or more on the opponent's infantry, that you can win the battle. Now let's talk a little bit about kind of what strategy we're thinking to take for the South and for the North. Let's start with the South. Our Southern strategy is basically defend. We've got 5 key positions that we're trying to defend, basically trying to form a line, hold this line, and prevent the North from breaking the line while letting the Northern forces beat themselves up against these strong defensive positions. Up in the north, we have D.H. Hill with some detachments there on top of this little hill here, which we can see, and hills are going to give us a defensive bonus. Down here, we have Ewell, some artillery, and some detachments in the west woods. We can see the woods here. Likewise, these woods give us defensive enhancements. Down here, this is the sunken road, and if you know underneath this, I can show it. This line here represents the sunken road, and if you know this is where some of the most hellacious fighting was over the course of the battle, with a lot of casualties on both sides. We've got troops from the South in these 2 defensive positions, again trying to force the North to beat themselves against kind of very strong defensive positions. Lastly, we have some more infantry and some detachments on the hills over across this bridge right here. Historically, Burnside, who lies on the other side of this river, spent a long time trying to get across this. This is a tough position to cross because you have to cross the bridge and take a hill position. 500 Georgians held up the northern attack for a substantial amount of time in the historical battle. We've also got a line of troops behind our front lines. We've got Jackson, cavalry, and McLaws here. They're going to be in positions as reserve, basically to plug holes as they come, because with the amount of northern forces, we can expect them to break through. We're probably going to have to fall back as the South, but we're also going to have to plug lines quickly when the case may be. For the North, we're going to start out under the historical circumstances. We're going to send both of our units up here. Hooker and then Mansfield are going to try to push across this ground here, come over this hill, and try to engage the Southern forces both on this hill and then in the east woods here, the west woods here. Now, the historical fighting happened right here on this cornfield, but I would prefer to keep the Confederate troops back in better defensive terrain. So we're going to try to slam against that and see what we can do, see if we can use our superior numbers to perhaps get some breakthrough there, or at least get some of the Southern reserves to commit here to try to hold the line here. But our biggest push for the North is going to be a little bit to the east. Here we see the mass of Union forces. Now, historically, Burnside, who was down here, spent a long time again trying to cross this bridge. I think that's a waste of time. Instead, we're going to try to do two things. One is we're going to try to cross the Antietam Creek right here, push straight towards Sharpsburg this way, and to try to push through Confederate forces here. Second, we're going to try to send Sumner across this ford right here, have them break into the open field and hit these two elements hard. We've also got artillery here and here. We're going to bring them up onto the high ground, this hill here and this hill here. We're going to take about an hour and a half, maybe 3 hours, and try to pound these Southern positions here, try to hit them with artillery and try to soften them up. Then we're going to send our troops across here in force, probably diverting a lot of Burnside troops up here too. The hope is to punch through the Confederate lines here and then break off to the northwest, perhaps even reach the baggage trains on the other side of Sharpsburg. And I think with all of that, it is time to get started. We're going to play ahead now for the first hour and a half, and we'll come back and take a look at how things went. And along the way, as we talk about the narrative of this battle as it happens in our hypothetical world here today, I'll be filling people in on how command and control works, how movement works, and then we'll show how combat works as well. Let's get started. 7 a.m. We'll see you in an hour and a half after the initial moves by both sides. Before we jump in and show the 7 to 8:30 turn results, let's take a brief moment to talk about some of the game mechanics, specifically how units move in the game. What we're looking at right now is a pile of chits, really, or little tokens that are thrown in a cup at the beginning of every turn. These tokens represent the different commands that are evident on either side of the game. We can see the 3 for the South, Cavalry, 2nd Corps, and 1st Corps, and the blue ones are all for the North. And basically, you blindly pull one of these out for each in turn, and if that's the one that's pulled, those are the units that go. Now let's see a unit to see how that might work. So here we're looking at the Confederate position. This is Longstreet's 1st Corps, and we can see all the units are designated here with a 1 in front of them. So when their 1 token gets pulled out of the cup, that's their turn to move. However, there's 2 ways to change this. Say, for example, the Union's 2nd Corps gets pulled, but Longstreet would really like to go before them. Longstreet can say, I'm going to jump the queue, and then you'll notice these 4 little pips that are on his leadership command token. That's what you have to roll, that number or less, in order for Longstreet to jump the queue. Then you can pull his token out and activate all Longstreet's units before 2nd Corps if Longstreet were to roll a 4 or less. You can only do that once per turn. Once you do it, you flip this up to indicate that it's been extinguished. Another thing that you can do instead of jumping the queue is delaying. So say we pull the 1st Corps' token from the cup, but we really want to wait to see what the Union's going to do first. Longstreet can say, I'm going to delay. He makes that same roll of a 1 to 4, extinguishes his ability to do that, and if he succeeds, we pull a different token out and then throw his 1st Corps back in there. Now, say for example, Longstreet jumped the queue. A different unit can try to jump the queue in front of Longstreet, creating this kind of cascade of varying sequence between there. So one of the things you're doing when you're conducting the battle is trying to jump the queue and delay so that you time your attacks and time your movement perfectly. So it's 8:30 a.m. The battle has been flowing for about 90 minutes now. Now, before we take a look at the results, I want to mention 2 quick things about the game system. The first thing is, when you play this game 2-player, you have these stickers facing you so your opponent can't see them. Because we're making a video, I've got them facing up, and that way so I can see them and you can see them much better. Now, when a unit gets spent in a two-player game, you flip it up so the sticker's up. I'm reversing that, so when a unit gets spent and takes some casualties, I'm flipping the sticker away from us. So I'm basically reversing it for the sake of making a video. The second thing, if you look carefully at this 830 position, you may notice that the depth of some of the Confederate positions has changed. There's a rule understanding that I just came into about the depth of the combat. So only one supporting unit allowed instead of two. So basically I've just kind of tweaked these positions before starting the movement to reflect I didn't want to have the Confederate forces have 3 units deep on their combat positions. So that's just a little bit of a rule tweak to make sure that we have a good encounter. So I've moved some of these detachments basically back to the center as reinforcements. So with that being said, let's take a look at the 830 results. Basically this can be characterized as maneuver. However, there were 2 forays by the north and some flourishes of Confederate artillery, casualties on both sides. Let's take a look at the position in the north first and then in the south next. In the very northern flank of the battle, both Meade and Ricketts charged these Confederate forces that were defending the hill here with AP Hill. There was also a detachment of Confederate militia there. They actually fought very well before eventually falling in battle, but the Confederates drove back both of the Union forces. Meade actually voluntarily withdrew because I didn't want to leave this baggage train. I was thinking that could have actually been pretty dangerous early on. So for the sake of protecting their line and protecting the baggage train, we had them retreat. We should be able to get them back into combat pretty quickly by refreshing them. But the south and AP Hill hold this hill on the western flank, on the left flank of the Confederate line. As we look to the center and southern end of the position, 2 things of note. Sumner's 2nd Corps and Pleasanton's cavalry both moved across the ford here and at Antietam Creek and have positioned themselves in a place where they can charge Hood and Anderson. We're holding strong defensive positions in the sunken road. Hood is an elite unit. It's going to be tough to push out, but this is basically the anchor to the Confederate line. If they go, it could be big, and the Union have a lot of forces ready to bring to bear on the attack. The Union also pushed artillery up onto the hills here and here, but as they pushed artillery up here, this Confederate artillery opened up. They felt a spent status and took casualties, so they will be unable to bombard until we get them back in order. Union, pressing the attack quickly, however, did rush across the Antietam Creek with these 2 units of detachments. This artillery held and basically blew them to pieces. These Union detachments wiped out. So 1 detachment of Confederate detachments and 2 units of Union detachments both wiped out. They do not count for losses in victory conditions, however. And that's the action basically after this first 90 minutes. So as the clock swings past 8:30 in the morning, we can see what we're heading to. Union forces are going to be in a position to charge Hill, Ewell, and artillery in the West Woods, Hood and Anderson in the sunken road, Walker and some artillery in the sunken road here. They have forces all lined up and ready to go. Hopefully the Union might be able to bring some artillery to bear. Which artillery fires first could actually matter significantly in what happens with the outcome of these next 90 minutes. So combat initiative and combat skill could be a factor here as we head into these next 90 minutes. The Union are going to charge. The battle is going to explode. We're quickly reaching a crescendo here at Antietam. We'll be back to see how things turned out in the next 90 minutes shortly. So we've done the movement portion of turn 2. We can see the Union forces now launching everything at the Confederate forces. If each one of these is 5,000 men, we've got 40,000 men slamming into the Confederate positions along their lines here. Normally I would execute these attacks and show the results, but to show how combat works as an example for one battle, let's zero in and do this one live. So this is a rough overview of how combat works. There are some other details, but basically combat happens in a number of simultaneous rounds. And it's very simple. An infantry unit gets 3 dice, and if it rolls a 4, 5, or 6, it hits your opponent. Units have normal units have a status that's fresh when they're at full strength like this. Once they take 1 hit, they go to spent status, which means you flip it. In this case, we're going to flip the name back down. A 2nd hit forces it to retreat. If it takes a 3rd hit, however, that's immediately wiped out. So if you get 3 hits on 1 attack, you'd wipe a unit out. However, there are some factors in this attack in particular that are going to change things up. First, Sedgwick's infantry here is a green unit. A green unit means its first hit counts as 2 hits. So if Hood here hits Sedgwick once, it's going to go spent and have to retreat. If it hits it twice, it gets wiped out. So it takes 2 hits to wipe it out instead of 3. Conversely, Hood's unit is an elite unit. That means it absorbs the first hit in each turn. So if Sedgwick unit hits Hood's unit, instead of it being spent, it's still normal. Now in the subsequent round, a second hit would make it go to spent. So the odds are fairly well stacked here against the Union forces here are launching green troops against experienced veterans, and Hood is in the sunken road, which means we have a -1 die roll modifier to the Union attacks. So the Union attacks need to hit on a 5 or a 6, and the first one doesn't count. So let's see what happens here with Sedgwick attacking Hood. They get a 6 and a 4, -1, so they do get 1 hit on Hood. However, he's an elite unit, so the first hit this turn doesn't have any effect. Now, Hood gets to return fire in his defensive role at Sedgwick. A 5, a 6, and a 3. That's 2 hits on Sedgwick, which is going to force him to retreat. So we turn him around and we're going to move him back 1/3 of a foot movement away. Sedgwick forces get pushed back 1/3 of a movement here, and that ends our first round. Hood is still in place. They took 1 hit, but they're elite, so it doesn't do anything to them. Second round, Hood can retreat, but they're going to stay where they are. French could retreat, but he's going to stay where he is, and he's going to push up, and the battle continues. Now we do it all over again. Same kind of thing. This time, however, the Union unit is fresh, and it's not green. So we get 3 dice, and they hit on a 5 or a 6, -1 because the Confederates are in the sunken road. It gets 1 hit. This time's Hood unit is spent because it already used its elite status in the previous round. We flip Hood's unit to spent status, but now Hood gets to attack French. A 5, a 6, and a 3. That's 2 hits on French's unit. The first one puts it to spent status. Second one forces it to retreat 1/3 of a movement back. Neither side loses units. Hood's unit is spent, it's been weakened, but Hood's unit has fought valiantly, driving back both Union forces and holding the sunken road. We'll conduct the other 3 attacks and see what it looks like at the end of this turn. So the Union attack slammed into the Confederate lines for about 45 minutes to an hour of fierce fighting. Let's take a look at the results. By and large, though, the Confederate line has held. The fiercest fighting was up here around this hill. Both Ricketts and Meade, the Union forces dropped their baggage train, which allowed both Ricketts and Meade to come back to fresh status. They once again charged this hill where D.H. Hill was holding ground. D.H. Hill drove Ricketts back to here. Meade and D.H. Hill, however, fought to the death, both sides wiping each other out, which gives the Union 1 kill of a Confederate infantry unit, and then the Confederates giving the Union, inflicting 1 kill on the Unions. This hill is open for the taking to whoever can seize the initiative and get it. In the West Woods here, Confederate cavalry driven back, both Union units driven back. They still hold the West Woods, although in here Ewell has been spent while trying to defend himself in the West Woods, but the line holds. The sunken road, we saw this battle here where it held. This is even particularly tougher for the Union because they have to run across this bridge and then attack, which means that this is considered as a flanking attack on them, so it's +1. No damage to the artillery or Walker's infantry. This artillery once again driving back the Union forces. Now the Union forces didn't suffer casualties. They were both driven back and forced to retreat. We've dropped the Union baggage train a little bit behind them here, however, so they will be able to refresh and then attack once again. But by and large, the Confederate line has held, although casualties and a potential opening in the north. We'll be back in an hour and a half to see what happens in the next segment of the battle. Things are getting crazy as we go to the noontime hour now. Lots of action going on. First up, the Union artillery was able to go first, and their fire was immaculate, driving out both Walker and the Confederate artillery. Tried to have the Confederate artillery preempt them, but they failed. The First Corps preempt them, but they failed, driving out Walker and the Confederate artillery with incredibly accurate and just devastating fire. That allowed Scammon to advance and actually take the sunken road, get in a position here because it was evacuated by the Confederates. Confederates trying to get it back now, Union sending more troops across the river. Confederates have pulled Jones, who is guarding this bridge over here, which leaves a possibility for something to go on over here. Meanwhile, Confederates frantically trying to get forces in the line. These are the weak detachments. These are weak detachments. This is Ewell, who's already spent. Jackson's elite behind it. Union forcing forward with cavalry up here and Doubleday's infantry, trying to muster as many forces as they can. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they're readying and refreshing a lot of the troops that are near these baggage trains. So the Union recovering quickly. The question remains, can the Confederates do likewise? They did send cavalry up here, but the Union artillery blasted them off the hilltop. Things are getting crazy now, and we still have to recover. We still have to execute the battles. Let's see what it looks like after the fighting. Heavy, bloody fighting in the sunken road. The Union lose a unit, the Confederates lose a unit, and both sides withdraw to regain strength. Up here on the other side of the Confederate line, the Confederates holding both Westwoods and the hill. Let's take a closer look. On the Confederate hill up here, a detachment was wiped out by the Union forces. Jackson's elite forces came up though, however, and drove back both the 2nd Cavalry and Doubleday, driving them away from the action and leaving the Confederates in charge of the hill. Likewise down here, the Union tried to press an attack. This was a detachment, but it weakened the attacking infantry, the cavalry here. The first, they decided to withdraw. They decided to retreat, leaving the Confederates and kind of holding the woods here. So no progress for the Union here. Confederates hold the line. Sunken Road, however, is a bloody mess. This Union infantry unit, Scammon, green units, taking on McLaws, who was attacking, a veteran unit attacking their newly acquired position here. Scammon wiped them out with just an incredible volley of fire. However, Jones here, who would flank them, was able to regain them and drive Scammon away from the sunken road. However, Sykes and Morrill, who have come across the river, were able to drive Jones back, leaving the sunken road empty, because what happened up here was this unit here, Anderson, was able to put on an incredible hand-to-hand combat with Richardson that was in here trying to attack it from the Union, wiping them out but forcing them to withdraw at the same time. The sunken road is wide open, whoever can get there first. As we head towards the noontime hour, however, the problem for the Confederates is they have so many spent forces. Some of these forces have withdrawn to try to get refreshed here by the baggage train, which we've dropped here. They should be able to replenish these, but the units holding the line here are worn out. These units are worn out. The Union, however, by their superiority of numbers and their location of their baggage trains, should be able to get fresh troops up into the battle into both of these positions after in this next hour and a half. So, depends on who reacts first, who can move up. The Confederates do have some cavalry over here they could push forward. They have Jackson over here, but everything else is spent. The Confederates have been pushed to the brink with the relentless Union attack. At this point, because there's a good chunk of the battle left to go, and it could go either way, we're going to come back for episode 2 to finish the last 5 turns of September 17th and finish this battle up. As it stands right now, casualty-wise, the Confederates have lost 2 infantry units. Remember, if they lose 5, that triggers their withdrawal. The Union have lost 3 infantry units. If they lose 8, that triggers their withdrawal. So the Confederates only 3 infantry units away. As we go forward here, it's going to be imperative that the Confederates refresh their troops, get some of them back up here. They may need to abandon the sunken road and fall back here. I think also to the Union advantage, they just need to push the attack again. They've got a bunch of fresh troops that were just refreshed. Over here, they might be able to sneak across the river. They have reinforcements that have just come in. Smith and Franklin's Corps has come in. The 6th Corps has just come in just off the edge of the map. They have forces, and they have the Confederates on the brink. They need to keep pushing. This is McClellan's moment. We're playing an aggressive McClellan. We are pushing him forward. I'll put a link to the next episode as soon as it's ready. Let me know what you think. Comments, ideas, thoughts are greatly welcome. We'll see you for the conclusion in episode 2 of Antietam.